Good morning and welcome back. We are studying botany. And yesterday we talked about roots. And there are a lot of vegetables that humans eat that we call root vegetables. Things like carrots and beets and turnips and things that grow underground. And so humans find root vegetables to be a good food source. Um, those roots can store a lot of starch, sometimes a little bit of protein, and then we end up eating those things, and they're really good for us. They're filled with all kinds of vitamins and minerals and nutrients that the plants were hoping to use so that they could stay healthy and create more plants, more clones of themselves. That's pretty much plants' main job is they just want to have babies. They just want to create little clones of themselves or breed with other plants and have kids with them and have little plant babies so that they can grow up and have plant babies. It's a cycle. Well, there's something interesting, which is if you looked at a plant, what you're going to see on the top of the soil, if we're just looking at a plant and everything that's underneath the ground we're not able to see because we're humans and we're not going to burrow necessarily. So if we're just using our eyes to observe the plant and look at it, we're going to see that top part and we think to ourselves, oh, well, that's where the stem comes out, right? Is, I guess, the difference between the root and the stem is, right at that little cutoff point, right? Where the ground is. And anything below the ground is the root, and anything that comes up above the ground is the stem, and the leaves and the flowers and all that stuff is up above ground. But that's not necessarily true. Um, it can be true. Sometimes you see when a carrot's growing, that root gets so big it actually pops up out of the ground, and you know that that nice big fat carrot is probably ready to harvest. So you can pull it up, and you'll see that the carrot has little tiny roots growing out of the major carrot body. But sometimes that's not the case. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about tubers and rhizomes. They're a little bit different, they're pretty similar. Tubers are basically underground stems. And why don't we call it a root? Well, it doesn't really serve a root function. And so, what it does is it stores a bunch of energy, like starch, that nice, yummy, sugary stuff that's coming um, where the water comes through the earth, soaks up in the root, goes to the plant, and all this nice, lovely leaf stuff that we're going to study in the next few weeks happens, creates these yummy sugars in the phloem and the xylem, and then it's going to store as starches and sometimes some proteins in this thick, waxy outside, starchy inside structure. And that's called a tuber. And a good example of a tuber is a potato. So we might think of a potato as a vegetable, um, but it's not. It's a tuber, and it's not a root, but it's similar. It's an underground plant structure that's like a stem, but it's an underground stem that also fills up with a whole bunch of starch. Potatoes are some of the most calorie dense foods in the world. So it fills up with all kinds of starch so that it can stay healthy. And then it sprouts out roots from there. And you can tell if you have a potato that you'll see it'll start to where we say that it has eyes. The eyes will start to um, grow out these little green um, growths, like these little pointed green growths that will turn into roots and will then regrow a whole potato plant. Um, so you will see roots coming out of the potato, but the potato itself is not a root, it's a tuber. Now, this gets complicated because sometimes there are root tubers. In other words, a tuber that instead of a stem tuber is a root tuber, and that exists too. So with sweet potatoes and yams and cassava, these are examples of root tubers. So that is actually a root vegetable. A sweet potato and cassava, those are root vegetables. Um, we eat a lot of those things. Some cultures rely mainly on those things for their food, for their nutrition. Same principle. It's going to store up those yummy starches to keep the plant in good shape so that it can continue to make more plant babies and grow out more roots. And the same thing with a cassava plant. If you're holding that cassava root tuber, or if you're holding a sweet potato, if you let it develop um, in some nice, dry, dark, it's going to start to grow out these, out of its eyes, it's going to grow out these little plant nodules out of these nodes. And those things will eventually form roots. And if you just plant it in the ground, it'll grow a whole nother sweet potato or cassava plant. Um, and so this actually creates some really thick plant structures because sweet potatoes, for instance, will grow these leaves, a really dense canopy of thick leaves. Just above where that root is, they're kind of like a little bit viney looking. Um, they stay close to the ground, doesn't want to get up too high. But the sweet potatoes will grow these leaves that actually are edible too. So people can eat the sweet potato leaves. So we like to grow them for that. You can have those sweet potato leaves, and then when you want to dig down, there'll be sweet potatoes. And if you just leave them in the ground, they'll continue to grow and grow and grow and grow until they run out of space. So they grow in clusters and bunches. And similarly, we also have rhizomes. And a rhizome is kind of like a sideways growing root um, that also is a, similar to a tuber, is a storage unit for the plant to um, stay alive and to create new plants. And a good example of this is like ginger or turmeric. Those things grow sideways and create more ginger and turmeric, and roots grow out of the bottom of this rhizome, and shoots grow out of the top, which goes up above the ground, um, and then you have leaves that grow out of that. And for anybody who's ever smelled a ginger flower, it's a very tropical, sweet, lovely smelling flower that lets you know that there might be edible ginger growing underground. There's a number of different ginger flowers. Some of them have non edible ginger. It's not edible to humans. But it's that same thing. Beneath that stem is going to be a rhizome, and that rhizome is going to sprout roots, and the roots are going to basically feed the rhizome, and the rhizome is going to feed the stem, and the stem is going to feed the leaves and flowers. So it's kind of like you could say it's like a battery bank for plants. It's like that backup energy storage system, or similar to how camels have a hump. And what is in a camel's hump? Water? Well, not really. They can drink and store a lot of water in their cells, but what's in a camel's hump is fat, a whole lot of fat. And that's how a camel can live in the desert. So when there's not a lot of food for the camel, it just eats its own back fat, that big hump that's on top of the camel. Similarly, these plants are going to eat their underground nutrition storage that they've got. It's like a little pantry that they've got, the rhizome or the tuber. Um, so we have a number of rhizomes and tubers that we as humans enjoy eating, and also a lot of them occur in nature and are not edible to humans. That doesn't mean that they're not very valuable things to all of nature. Pretty much everything that's in nature exists for a purpose and serves a function and is related to everything else. So just because humans don't have a use for it doesn't mean it's not a totally valid and wonderful natural part of the world that we should just leave alone and not touch. All right, so that's it for tubers and rhizomes, and we will chat more tomorrow about what these things grow in: roots and seeds and tubers and rhizomes. They all grow deep down underground, and what is under there? Well, we'll explore more of that tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in. Nice to see you all, and I will see you tomorrow.